We are now officially live. Hopefully everyone can hear us. Can you hear us, guys? Let us know in the comments if you can. I can see Sultan Alush has already commented, so hopefully that's a good sign. Things are going live. I can see it in my screen anyway, starting to roll up. So hopefully it'll start broadcasting in a minute. It's already commented, so hopefully that's a good sign. Things are going live. I can see it in my screen anyway, starting to roll up. So hopefully it'll start broadcasting in a minute. It's already commented, so there we go. So it's playing me back. I think we're live, guys. So great. We have Mike and James from Renaissance Periodization with us today, which is fantastic. We're very happy to have you here. And me and Mike Samuels are going to be interviewing these guys. So initially I'll introduce both James and Mike to whoever doesn't know about these two great guys who are incredibly intelligent and very good at what they do. So without further ado, James, physiology, a master's degree in applied exercise physiology, a bachelor's of science in biochemistry, and is NSCA certified strength and conditioning coach, and is the current head sports scientist and assistant coach for ETSU men's rugby, which is very impressive.
You gotta correct that.
Well, I used to be, and I moved to Philadelphia, so I left those guys hopefully in a good place. Hopefully they're doing well, but I still chat with them. They're still rocking and rolling.
Let's see if he's. I think this is after you.
Oh yeah, well, that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, we're all good.
So yeah, that's James anyway. Sorry about the kind of misinformation. He was head. So with Mike, again, a BS in movement science, an MS in exercise science, PhD in sports physiology, assistant professor at Temple University, primary sport nutritionist consultant for Olympic training site in the US, Johnson City, sports scientist for ETSU athletics, strength coach at ESTU women's volleyball, competitive powerlifter and competitive bodybuilder. Doing very well in both fields. Is that right, Mike?
Not really. I would say I was a decent powerlifter, a terrible bodybuilder, and actually a pretty good Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu grappler, it turns out. So,
He's okay, bodybuilder.
I try. I'm getting better. That's what's important. My mommy says that I'm getting better, and that's good.
So basically, you're strong, jacked, and clever, and kick people's asses.
Say that again?
Sorry, guys, what was that?
So basically, you're strong and jacked and clever, and can kick people's asses.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah. I'd say. He's looking pretty tan now these days, too.
Yeah, I've got a show coming up, so I go to the tanning salon. It's me and a lot of people who usually go to tanning salons that don't look like me. So it's pretty fun. They put me in for 10 minutes by accident the other day, and they said it was going to be 7, and I burned to a crisp. It was really great. It was one of those where, like, you know, they play music in the tanning salon, and I was like 3 whole songs in, and the tanning bed is still on, and I'm like, that seems like longer than 7 minutes, and it's kind of hot in there, and I get out, and I'm like, ah! Showering over the next couple of days was, fun.
Awesome. Cool. The reason why we got
go for it, Mike.
So I think it's a bit of a delay, but yeah, the reason why we got the guys on was to have a chat before they come to the UK. So basically, a brief outline of what we're going to be doing. So we're putting on some seminars. We've got 2 dates announced. So we're in Brighton on Wednesday, May the 18th. We've got a day there where the guys are going to be talking all things training, nutrition, and recovery. And in Brighton, just get the details up. So yeah, Wednesday, May the 18th, from 9 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock in the evening. And that's at the Performance Project, which is Hayward Heath, RH161TW. We'll throw some links up to the pages so you can get addresses and details and stuff later on as well. And then on the weekend, Saturday the 21st and Sunday the 22nd of May, from 10 till 6, we're at Birkbeck University of London, which is right in central London. And that's going to be same topics, but it's going to be a 2-day, so the Saturday and the Sunday. We're covering similar topics, but going into a lot more depth and covering everything in more detail. So hopefully already pretty interested in those, but if not, by the time we get to the end of this interview, I'm sure everybody will be. So yeah, back to Steve, and we'll get cracking with some questions, I think.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah, if Mike and James, if you just want to kind of briefly go over the sort of topics and kind of subject areas you might be presenting, kind of some ideas, I guess, and I gather similar sort of topics to what have been in your kind of books from Renaissance periodization. Just have a brief summary of what what people can look forward to.
For sure. Mike, you want to start it off? Or you want me to? Yeah, so, Mike and I both have degrees in sport physiology. Our areas of interest are sport performance enhancement through good training practices, good nutritional practices, and one thing that we look at a lot is good recovery modalities. So the things that we want to talk to you guys about are how to maximize your efforts in training, what things you maybe can spend a lot of time doing, what things you should maybe spend less time doing. Same thing with your nutrition, right? There are some things that are really sexy, really trendy, things that people really like to talk about, but sometimes they're not as powerful as we like to think. So we like to talk about all the things that are going to lead to success in a good nutritional program and get you on the track to be the leanest, most muscular, bad mofo on the planet. I think those are usually the things that we talk about the most.
Mm-hmm. And we'll probably be talking about training as well. So we'll probably talk training from a principled perspective, and just basically how to, not so much how to build a program step by step, but how to make sure that whatever program you build is guided by scientific principles of training, and you're not deluding yourself into violating really big training principles, and making sure you've got overload taken care of, making sure specificity, like, what do you want, picking what you want out of a training program, understanding how one part of a training program can interfere with another part, can interfere with the final result, making sure you're fatigue managing properly, so that, when we're talking about program design, James and I don't really get preachy about what the right way to do things is. We can tell you how to avoid a lot of really big mistakes. And we like to, in our students that we teach, we like to encourage a lot of creativity in program design. And we very rarely say, no, we see he says sets of 3 here, but it should be sets of 4. All right, it's not the kind of programming we're into. But we're saying, why is the volume lower here where it probably should be higher? So we'll be definitely talking about some training from a principal perspective. And one other cool thing we'll be doing is Dr. Hoffman and I really love to answer questions. Because, you go on YouTube and hear us talk, and you can take, sometimes we offer online courses through our universities, and you can take those, you can go on YouTube, and there's some of those for free, and that's really good, but when we're live in, the United Kingdom in some number of weeks, we're going to be able to really interact with people and answer the kind of in-depth questions that people only can sort of bring on the spot, and we'd love to do that. So at every seminar we're going to be doing, and that we always do, there's going to be a really big question and answer component. So honestly, right now, for those watching who will plan on being in attendance for the seminar, bring questions, bring a lot of them. Bring the personal ones that you're too embarrassed to ask, and we'll make sure you ask them. We'll laugh at you. Everyone's going to point. You're going to run away screaming and crying. It's going to be the worst day of your life. Just kidding. Bring questions, the real detailed stuff, real particulars. Dr. Hoffman and I love being stumped, and we love the in-depth questions, so that's one of the reasons we're going to be there. We're not just going to give a dry talk, close up shop, and go hang out and have beers at the pubs.
Well, that's what I'm going to do.
Well, we're going to be doing that after we answer all the questions. And hey, what? If we go out after the seminars, which we'll almost certainly do, and we're going to be out drinking, we invite everyone at the seminar probably to come join us, and they can try to ask us questions when we're drinking. The answers may change throughout the night, depending on how we're feeling. The reliability certainly falls off, but more truth value maybe.
And we don't know where to go either, so
we have no idea where to go. We're going to be drinking at your museums, at your amusement parks. We're Yankee asshole tourists, and we're going to be as American as fuck. And we're just gonna be totally antisocial. It'll be great.
Cheers, guys. That's fantastic. I guess, Mike, you're going to be on that post-contest prep binge, aren't you? So you're going to need all those beers to fuel those gains initially.
I am excited to eat traditional British food, which includes
Fish and chips.
fish and chips.
All right.
Do you guys really just have one food?
It's that and roast dinners as well. That's pretty much it. So
That's all right. Like, you know, what do we have? Like hot dogs?
Yeah, we don't
Hamburger?
have
Like, whatever.
we specialise in beige and brown foods. So if you like beige and brown things, then you're in the right place.
Beige, I'm not sure. Brown sounds golden brown. That sounds good.
Mike also has an alternate personality we call Brown Guy.
Yeah.
So,
I'll just wear my brown sweatpants and sweatshirt during the seminar. I'll look like a giant walking turd. It'll be great. I'll just tell everyone in America looks like this. It'll be awesome.
I think we've just sold out all the seminars after that.
we made a really good case.
Cool. So do we want to go on to the Q&A round now? And it might invite some further questions. And I think the amazing thing about being in person with these guys will be that Q&A section. Like they obviously showed, they have a massive passion for this area. And the fact is, you can ask questions on the fly when you're in person. You can go delve into deep discussions. It will be fantastic. So without further ado, we'll get into some of the questions you guys have already asked. I'll let Mike cover the first one. And It's all training related at first.
Yeah, so first training question came from Tom Currell. He put, programming for hypertrophy towards bodybuilding rather than powerlifting. What the main difference is. So I'm guessing he's talking about kind of maybe a bit of hybrid programming, but also in terms of, what are going to be the main differences if you're training purely for bodybuilding versus training for hypertrophy for powerlifting.
You want to do this one?
Take it.
Yeah.
So I can think of several main differences within just a single mesocycle of training that are different between bodybuilders and powerlifters, both training for hypertrophy. One difference is one of specificity of body parts targeted. Bodybuilders are going to spend significant amount of amount of volume load of their program sets and reps training medial and rear delts. They're going to spend a lot of time training their lats, not just for thickness but for width. They're going to spend time doing lots of leg curls to develop fullness in the hamstrings. They're going to be doing a lot of calves emphasis and training their arms to a significantly higher extent than powerlifters. So while the goal is muscle growth, in powerlifting, the most muscles trained are the ones specific to the powerlift, which cover most of the body, but not the entire body. So one of the first most obvious differences between bodybuilding and powerlifting is going to be in exercise selection and body part splits. A lot of times, bodybuilders will have much fancier splits because they have to cover more stuff. And a lot of times, they'll have to spend more time in the gym total, and they can train at higher volumes, not because they can recover better, but because they can train more of their body. Like a powerlifter wanted to train their shoulders more, their arms more, their calves more, they could, but it wouldn't help them much with their sport. They'd be better off just recovering. A bodybuilder has to spread their work more evenly and cover every single detail. In addition to that, a powerlifter trains for hypertrophy to get the best transfer of training for strength. The only reason a powerlifter needs size is because it produces strength. A bodybuilder needs size only for its own sake, fundamentally. So bodybuilders will more often engage in training for hypertrophy that is, from a nervous system perspective and a fiber type targeting perspective, more general than powerlifting training for hypertrophy, which powerlifting training for hypertrophy should have two rules. Rule number one, it should mostly train the fast twitch muscle fibers because those are the ones that per cross-sectional area produce more force. If you just get bigger, that's awesome. But if more of that size is in the fast twitch fibers, you're going to see more strength per that same level of size. So if a powerlifter engages in a type of training that predominantly targets slow twitch muscle fibers, maybe high rep or metabolite training, that's not going to have the same carryover to performance. And the second consideration that a powerlifter has to make that a bodybuilder does not is that a powerlifter has to make sure that the nervous system characteristics of high force production never quite
get too far away in that hypertrophy phase. So you can lift in repetition ranges from 6 to 10 to make sure that you get a really good stimulus for size, but if you start lifting in sets of 15 to 20, transitioning to basic strength phase later, sets of 5, is going to be one hell of a shock you don't want to go through because you've taken yourself so far away from a neural and technical standpoint. If you're used to doing sets of 8 in the squat for growth, when you transition to sets of 6 or 5 or 4 or 3 in your strength phase, it's already felt heavy to you. You're used to that heavy weight, no problem. The nervous system and your technical abilities are pretty similar, so there's not a big shock. But if you are a bodybuilder and you've used a lot of sets of 15 to 20, maybe even 25 drop sets, and now you have to do heavy sets of 5, my God, it's going to take you 2 or 3 mesocycles to even get used to sets of 5. So for powerlifters, they have to make sure they keep it sport-specific, and they have to make sure that their hypertrophy is, in some sense, we could say, more functional, or at least more specific to their demands of maximal strength production. Whereas bodybuilders need to use every available size training tool. They can train the slow twitch muscle fibers much more. They can use metabolite training much more, and they need to cover more of the body. And in the end, that makes the programs look reasonably different, although the fundamentals are the same. They're going to be split apart to some certain extent, which is another reason why if you're a combination bodybuilder and powerlifter, it's probably best for you to split up your competitive year in times that you really focus on bodybuilding versus times that you really focus on powerlifting. Because if you try to do both simultaneously, you're going to run into a problem of specificity and kind of weaving demands. Powerlifters, it's time to transition to strength. You can't afford to do high volume training anymore. It's too fatiguing. But if you have a bodybuilding show coming up in the same week or same month, you can't drop your volume because you're going to drop a bunch of muscle mass. So if you want to do combined powerlifting and bodybuilding at a serious level, it's probably best to pick a bodybuilding show in November and a powerlifting meet in May, something like that. So you have a good range within which to transition your efforts. And if you want to be a little good at both, or plenty good at both, you can just add a bit of extra muscle volume training for the rear delts, calves, hamstrings, biceps to your regular powerlifting program. Just lower your overall volume a little to accommodate, and you should be okay. But if you want to get really serious, it should be a real dual sport athlete tries to position their sports as far away from each other in the competitive macro cycle as possible.
That's awesome. I think from what you said, the mistake a lot of people make is thinking that they complement each other, which in a way they do, but at the same time, if you do want to get really good, then it's kind of like trying to play 2 different sports at a really high level. You just can't do it and excel, basically. So I'm pretty sure that's answered Tom's question absolutely perfectly and more so. It's awesome. Steve, did you want to shoot with the next question?
Yeah, for sure. So the next question is, we haven't got any ones. Oh no, sorry, it's from Paul. Or I probably said that completely wrong. I apologise. What are the differences in training during a mass gain versus fat loss for a bodybuilder? So training differences during mass gain and fat loss. Is there any?
Training differences? Well, they actually overlap quite a bit, right? So obviously the big difference is during the mass gaining phase, we're trying to build muscle mass, whereas in the cut phase, we're trying to reduce body fat and maintain as much muscle mass over time. And so it turns out the way that we program both of those, man, it's pretty darn similar. I'd say they overlap, 85, 90% of the time, with really the major differences being sometimes in our mass building phase, we do use periods where we might be going a little bit heavier. Not super crazy. We generally keep the reps a little bit high, but it's not unusual to train in that maybe 6 to 8 range when we're trying to put on a lot of muscle mass. Now, for cut phases, unfortunately, dipping into that little bit higher force, a little bit stronger range really just isn't a very productive way to train. So more often than not, when we're trying to maintain muscle mass, we're generally going to keep the volume high by keeping the reps moderate to high, somewhere probably between 8 to 12 reps or so. And one problem that we've run into with some of our clients, I was talking with Mel earlier today, we'll get clients and their coaches will say, okay, you need to cut weight for whatever reason, and they'll give them a maximal strength program. They'll be doing like 5x2, right, in hopes of maintaining all of their strength throughout their cut, which, at face value seems reasonable, but you run into a bunch of problems. One, the fatigue that you generate from dieting down is so massive, it's going to inhibit your ability to express good technique, express good force output, express good power output. So training under those super heavy loads, man, it's just not going to happen. You're just going to have really, really crappy consistent training. And then the other problem you run into is really the volume of training you get from doing those maximal efforts is just not high enough to sustain that muscle mass. And then you end up constricting calories under a low volume of training. It leads to a higher propensity of muscle loss. So kind of the short answer is, how different are they? Well, they're really not all that different. We generally keep the reps pretty high, keep the loads pretty moderate. With the mass gaining side, we might have a couple more phases where we go a little bit heavier. But for the most part, generally, we keep it probably anywhere from 6 to 12 reps, lots of sets, lots of base exercises, your base presses, your base pulls, squats, deadlifts. And other than that, they're not all that different. Mike, did you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, there's not like any magic in training for a cut. You're not etching striations or doing sets of 20 to, burn in the details, brother. Feather out those quads. You feather your quads because you don't get to eat much food, not because, and you do your cardio to burn fat, not because you're making any kind of detail. So a cutting phase doesn't need any more kind of isolation exercise or detail. I will say this, that a cutting phase, usually your maximal recoverable volume will be a little bit lower than it is on a massing phase because you're eating so much food. And that's why we maybe want to do slightly higher repetitions, because higher repetitions let us get to similar volumes but with less fatigue, right? So if we want to build lots of fast twitch muscle fibers, it definitely pays to go a little bit heavier, sets of 8 or so, when we can tolerate that level of fatigue. But if we insist on training too heavy during a cutting phase, we end up getting neither of both worlds. We're training too heavy to allow high volumes, and we can't afford high volumes. We can't just tack on more stuff to that because our MRV is going to be a little lower during a cut because recovery ability is not the same. So during a cut, you got to do your best to make sure you stimulate as much volume as possible. And the way to get as much volume as you can in a program is to probably lighten loads up a bit. Are you going to be hitting huge numbers, huge PRs during a cut? No. But with relatively as high as you can volumes, you'll make sure to keep your muscle mass on. And that actually applies to strength athletes as well. If you want to lose a lot of fat as a strength athlete, take a dedicated phase of 8 to 12 weeks where you're training with higher repetitions than the strength phase, right? The strength athletes with these sets of 6 to 10, if not a little higher, keep that muscle on. Your strength is going to not be very good because your nervous system is going to forget how to express its strength. You're not going to be in sets of 3 to 5. When you finish with that cut phase, you've lost a lot of fat. Now you maintain what you've lost and return back to that strength training. You kept all the muscle, and all you have to do is relearn the nervous system characteristics and the muscle architecture. Within several weeks, you're back to your old strength, and everything's okay. But if you keep trying to train for strength during that hypocaloric phase, that cutting phase, you end up, like James said, not getting enough training to make sure you don't lose muscle. And because you are so fatigued, your nervous system strength training requires a lower baseline of fatigue to be productive. If you're training for strength and you go in beat up and tired, you're not training for strength anymore. You can tell yourself anything you want, but you have to lift heavy to train for strength. If you don't have the energy to lift heavy, you will have the energy to simply pound out sets and reps. So you do have the energy to save your muscle on a cut by training with lighter weights, but you don't have the energy to try to keep your strength by always staying peaked for strength. And that's a very common myth. And at Renaissance, we're really trying to change that idea. If you want body composition alterations as a strength athlete, weightlifter, powerlifter, strongman, you got to take some more like bodybuilding time, keep that muscle, get away from super heavy weights for a while. Once you've made those body composition changes, you can go right back to sets of 3 and 5, get all your strength back, and everything's going to be golden. But if you keep trying to pound it with strength training while losing weight, it's going to be the worst of two worlds, unfortunately.
And on a similar note, stop cutting into your competitions. That kills us.
Yeah. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so for the exact same reasons that Mike was just talking about, a lot of guys will come to us and they say, hey, I got a powerlifting meet or I got a weightlifting meet, and they're trying to make weight 1 or 2 months out. Well, homie, the problem is, you probably should have already been at your target weight 1 to 2 months out of the competition. If you're going to be trying to hit your maximal strength phase or your peaking phases for your meet while you're cutting, the problem is you're going to have crappy training. You should be having the best training that you're ever having during that cycle. Your recoverability is going to be down. And again, the same problem as we mentioned before, you might not even have enough volume to maintain that muscle mass. So the times where you should be getting the most physically fit to compete is going to be the worst training you have because you're continuing to make this hard cut all the way through. So we usually recommend 1 to 2 months out, you're within about 2% plus or minus of your target body weight, and then it makes it really easy. You can transition back into that peaking maximal strength phase. You can reintroduce some calories and have very, very productive training even after a pretty strenuous cutting phase.
Yeah, to use a really simple analogy, if you have a big race coming up in formula racing, right, like race cars, you know, before the race, you've got to be at the test track running your car around to get trial times going. If you're trying to fix your car while you're running trial times, your trial times are going to suck because your car is going to be dilapidated and you're still making adjustments. What you have to do is show up a couple weeks earlier, make all the fixes to your car. Once your car is ready to go pretty much, then you start running those trial times, and then you're in good shape for that race because you've been practicing with an actual functioning car like it's going to appear in your race. Basically, this is one of those life lessons, so to speak, that probably grandma and mom used to tell you. Do your homework. Get there early. Make sure that you're in shape well before your competition if you're a strength athlete. Bodybuilders diet into shows because nobody gives a shit how strong you are on stage. And because you can't stay at 3% for weeks and weeks without going completely insane. But for powerlifters and Olympic lifters, they've got to test that new body out under great conditions. Those are not cutting conditions. So 4 to 6 weeks before your meet, at a minimum, you should already be at competition weight. And then everything is going to fit. You're going to learn how to use that body, and everything's going to go well. If you cut all the way into a meet, you know what? Don't take our advice. Try cutting into a meet and let us know how that works out. It always leads to a disaster.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I think it's something that I struggle with sometimes with clients, that they think they'll have a better chance at competition if they're lighter and in a lower weight class. And actually, you've just got a better chance of competition if you're stronger and can go 9 for 9 because you've got the energy to make it, not because you're a few kilos lighter in a lower weight class.
Yeah, for sure, right? So there's no point in dropping to a lower weight class if you bomb out the whole time, right?
Yeah.
You could have.
There are lifters whose careers are defined by stupid attempts to drop way too low all the time, and they'll post on Instagram, I went 3 for 9, or I went 2 for 6, but, you know, next time I'm not cutting anymore, and sure enough, next meet comes up, they're posting progress pics a week out, like, look, I have abs, and I'm hitting PRs. Sure enough, next meet comes, they bomb again, and you're like, all right, you know, whenever you're ready.
You know what else, too? I don't know how it is out by you guys, but, you know, here in the States, it's not like there's a shortage of meets going around. You can do a weightlifting or powerlifting meet every weekend if you want to. So it's like, you don't have to rush to make this cut, to make this one meet. Take the time that you need. You don't have to rush. It's crazy.
Fun. I agree. I think we don't have as many as you guys do, but they're common enough not to have to rush into it completely. Just to touch base on that question, because we kind of ended up answering fat loss for bodybuilding and powerlifting, which was fantastic and more than what could have been asked for. But basically, the main differences between mass gain and fat loss for bodybuilding, I think, from what you guys, I gather, was there isn't a lot of difference. You don't so much go into the heavier rep ranges. You don't really dip down below 8 reps. The intensity is a bit too high, so volumes come down too far. So essentially, it's not really training for fat loss. You're more so training for that muscle gain, but the volume you can do is slightly reduced.
Yep, spot on.
Cool. If we move on to next question then, this is one that Steve was actually thinking about. And he says, for reference, how often should a beginner train their muscle groups if the goal is maximal hypertrophy? So I guess it's asking about training frequency in effect.
Yeah, so I can start this one off, and I'm sure you'll have more to contribute, right? So there's a lot of different research that look at dose response with frequency. And long story short is, when you are beginner, or when you are less trained, we'll say, it turns out you really don't generate as much internal disruption as somebody who is really big and strong already. So it turns out if you are less trained, or you're starting off a program, you can actually train each muscle group relatively frequently. If you comb through the literature, a lot of papers will say very easily you can train any given muscle group 3 times per week without much trouble. I think Mike and I would say you can probably do some muscle groups like biceps or other things probably even more frequently than that. But a lot of that will be on an individual basis, right? So that is something that we can say in a general sense, like, yeah, if you're a beginner, you can probably train each muscle group more frequently. But again, you might have to evaluate that on a personal level. Some people might do 2 sets of deadlifts and they are out of commission for the next week and a half, right? So can they really train their posterior chain muscles again 3 times a week? Probably not. But other people can, especially those who are not terribly strong, powerful, or fatigue resistant yet, just because they don't generate as much disruption within their own muscles. You know, frankly, not to sound mean, they're just not strong enough to hurt themselves yet. And as they get stronger and stronger and stronger, their training gets harder and harder and harder, and it takes longer for them to recover from each session. You want to build on that a little bit?
Yeah, we can actually give a pretty simple piece of advice for training frequency over a career span. God damn it.
Come here. My cat is trolling us. Say hi.
He loves attention. There, you're on TV.
Mwah.
All right. So, training frequency when it comes down to career span. As you go, so there's a caveat here that between 0 and 6 months of training experience, you're still getting used to the acute repeated bout effect of training. You're going to take on massive amounts of damage and slow to recover because it's simply something you've never felt before. So before 6 months of training, which I wouldn't even call a beginner, I'm not even sure what to call that. You're still untrained. You can probably train maybe 2 times a week, maybe 3 at the most the same muscle groups, and you need lots of recovery time. And you probably wouldn't benefit from training much more often than that. However, anyone after 6 months of training, more or less, training frequency, the more often you train, up to probably 4 to 6 times a week for each muscle group, seems to confer pretty good advantages for strength development and size development. So training frequency should be high if you're interested in investing at the highest levels. However, what falls over the course of a career is overload frequency. Yes, hypertrophy programs that have high-frequency training usually do better than low-frequency ones, but they don't overload every single session. So with the really advanced athletes, this is especially evident in weightlifters. Bulgarian weightlifters, etc., Russian weightlifters will have 14, sometimes 18 sessions a week, but they don't go in and hit PR, 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 PR every time they go in. They'll have one day where they go really hard, one day where they'll go really easy, one day where they'll go moderate, one day easy, one day super hard, rest, and then repeat. Whereas a more beginner athlete could do reliably pretty similar loads and not need that pulsatility. So your training frequency for most individuals past 6 months per body part, we would say, is between 2 and 6 times per week, depending on the body part. Bigger body parts usually less, smaller body parts usually more, but overload frequency needs to get lower as you become a very highly trained athlete. So it's very easy to say, you know, for someone who weighs maybe 60 kilos, can they squat hard and heavy and with good volume in each workout 4 days a week? Totally. 5 days a week maybe, sometimes every day. That's possible. Someone who weighs maybe, let's say 100 kilos, how many hard squat workouts can they really have in a week? Oh man, you know, maybe 3, and they can train 6 times a week, and that's possible, but it would have to be hard, very easy, hard, very easy, hard, very easy. Then we get up to a very high-level athletic, somebody who weighs 160, 165 kilos, maybe Chad Wesley Smith or somebody like that, so a power lifter like that, who is enormous squats, you know, regularly works up to 350 kilos. How many times can you squat 350 kilos in 1 week? Man, maybe twice, maybe once.
That
In the other sessions,
JTS challenge, right? He did like the 500 for 20
That's
reps
right.
or whatever. How many times can you
how
squat?
many times can you
350
squat
per week?
350K per week? 18 entries, 19 deaths, right? But so you know, the result is, yes, high training frequencies seem to be better than lower training frequencies. There's almost never a reason to train a muscle group once a week, but some athletes that are at such a high level can disrupt homeostasis so much that they only have one really hard workout per week and another one with a different focus that's not as disruptive, not as heavy. Because if you think high training frequencies are good, you're off to a great start. But if you think you can pound it day in and day out, overload, and hit PRs, the more advanced you get, the more you're going to find out that's absolutely not the case. The extreme example of that is with a very disruptive exercise with very large, high-level, strong lifters. Andy Bolton, Magnus, what's his name, Benedict Magnuson, and Andrei Milanichev, to use 3 examples. There are others. Deadlift heavy really hit PRs once every 2 to 4 weeks in their program. That's how long it takes to recover. So if you wrote a program for a beginner that had them going really heavy in the deadlift once every 2 to 4 weeks and made some kind of sick joke, you're just holding them back, they might be able to go heavy 2 or 3 times a week and have a light session on top of that. But if you try to go 2 or heavy 3 times a week and you're pulling 300K plus, you're going to fall apart like Mr. Potato Head, and then people say, well, see, high-frequency training doesn't work. It sure does, but you have to manage your volumes and intensities and allow for periods of recovery.
Talk about leg to torso ratio.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man, he's built. And, you know, heavy and light days is something that we're going to talk about in our recovery talks, too. It's something that's a good fatigue management strategy. Not in addition to promoting long-term gains, it's also a good way to make sure you're not burning out all the time. So we'll talk more and more about that when we're in town.
There's this illusion, this common myth, that every time you enter the gym, you've got to smash it, brother. Like it's life or death every time. And the reality is you should have distinct days where you're pushing it very hard and distinct days where you're not pushing it very hard and you're still in the gym training. It's a good stimulus, but it provides recovery as well as some adaptation so that you can, instead of resting more and just being at home and losing some of your gains, you can maintain those earlier gains and set up the recovery for another hard workout later. And almost all the advanced systems of training, Shaco included, have dedicated light, hard, and very hard days, or light, moderate, and hard days that are structured appropriately to make sure that we're in the gym often, which is good. Training frequency is high, which is good, but overload frequency has to drop as career peak approaches.
So just to be clear, you're saying that you don't have to engage beast mode every single session?
I mean, if you're willing to not be a real man and you just want to be jacked and strong, yes. But, you know, if you want to be a true warrior but you don't want to be jacked and strong, you have to go in there and try to flip over all the machines for the attendants to pick up afterward. What I like to do is unload the leg press and just tip the machine over and walk away.
We get a lot of that here in the States. A lot of the strength coaches, we call them good old boys. They're just like guys who don't really have a lot of education in the field, and they've just been coaching for a long time, and they have this expectation of life and death, especially in sports like American football and some other ones where the guys have to come in and they have to just go to failure, ball-busting intensity the entire time. And what we find is that that's probably not the best way to go about things, and having some structured down times or structured recovery times actually will allow them to get more fitness and promote long-term gains. So pretty good idea.
Yeah, I think if you don't pop out a knee socket or have a nosebleed, you're clearly not training hard enough. But that's
Totally.
Steve, did you have the next training question?
Yeah, so to follow on from that, the same guy has asked, how often should someone incorporate pump-type training with single joint movements if his goal is maximal hypertrophy? So I guess that specificity would dictate that I'd be a bodybuilder and not a powerlifter.
Pump training?
Yeah, pump. So I'm guessing he means like high reps, 15 plus.
You want to do so metabolite training essentially?
Yeah. So like, metabolite training, which is, so there's 2 primary pathways of hypertrophy in human skeletal muscle. One of them seems to be based on generating high resistances over extended periods, high force, traditional heavy loading. And the other pathway seems to be hinged on generating lots of metabolites like lactic acid and when they sit in the proximity of the muscle, they actually activate some similar growth pathways as well. The metabolites work probably not as well as conventional heavy training, which should be the basis of your program. Metabolite training as well is usually very high volume and generates a lot of fatigue, and it probably transitions fiber types a little bit into neural characteristics of slow twitch versus fast twitch. So it's not really a sustainable form of training. And one thing you can tell if you've been training with metabolites for long enough, you've experimented with it, in the first several weeks in which you use it, it wipes you out. You get crazy sore, you get huge pumps, everything's awesome. after about 4 or 5, 6 weeks, it just feels like you're doing nothing. You're pumping and nothing's happening. It seems to be a very rapidly adapting pathway, unlike heavy resistance, which is just meat and potatoes always works, right? Sets of 8 in the squat never let you down. So how often should you do metabolite-style training? Probably, if you're a bodybuilder, once every 2 or 3 mesocycles, you should incorporate some heavy resistance as well as metabolites, and then move away from that back to conventional lower repetition, more moderate repetition, heavy load training. So I'd say every now and again, 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4 mesocycles that you do can be one of those metabolite mesocycles. And as far as within the week program design, how often should you do isolation moves? That really depends on your program design, but I would say that if you have a program, your average hypertrophy program for bodybuilding, if 2/3 of the lifts are not compound heavy basics, you probably messed up. If you have a day where you only do isolation work, you don't know how to design a training program. So here's a good example. Here's a good example of just a typical leg day. Squats, several sets of 10. Leg presses, several sets of 12. Stiff-legged deadlift, several sets of 8. And then hamstring curls, several sets of 12. So we got 4 exercises, only one of them is isolation. If your idea of training legs is good girl machine, bad girl machine, right? Adductor, abductor, hamstring curl.
It took me a second.
Hamstring curl, like leg extension, and maybe you do squats at the end, you're really not providing the kind of overload that's ever really going to grow muscle. And this is one of the situations where people ask, is there literature to support that compound barbell heavy basics are better than isolation moves? Yes, there is. There's not a ton because there's a problem. Individuals on whom almost all of these tests are done are beginner weight trainers whose hypertrophy responses are maximized when they get off the couch and walk to the bathroom. So you give them any kind of resistance protocol, they're going to max out the responses. There's going to be very few differences between groups. Where you get a hint that this is true is through mechanistic analysis, but as well, talk to people who are really giant, who have a ton of muscle. Almost all of them will say the way you get big is mostly through compound heavy basics. Nobody's going to tell you that they got huge legs with leg extensions. If you've been training for a long time, you can feel it. James, how many leg extensions does it take for you to feel like you've had a workout?
Woo, like infinity.
Like an infinity. You could be on that machine for an hour and nothing's happening, right? You're working hard, you're going to failure, just not shit. You do 4 sets of 12 in the squat, you start vomiting blood out of your eyes, and then you realize, oh, this is how muscle growth happens. So most of your routine should be compound, no matter really what you're training.
Yeah, one thing that Mike and I like to talk a lot about is the concept of MRV, the maximum recoverable volume, and this kind of falls into this. We have so much training that you can tolerate, right? Effort, time, those are all fixed variables, right? You can only have so much effort, only have so much time. So if you're trying to get the most hypertrophy or the best strength out of your program, you might as well fill all that effort and time with the exercises that are going to be the best bang for your buck, right? So if you're just filling up your 2 hours of training for that day with single joint stuff, are you going to get stronger, more muscular? Sure. But could you have gotten more stronger if you just picked one exercise, like a squat or a deadlift or a bent row, and just did a bunch of them? Yeah, you probably could have gotten a lot more out of it. So you want to fill up most of your training time and efforts with generally the things that are going to make you most successful. And in this case, it's usually the compound kind of our basic lifts, our pushes, pulls, squats, deadlifts.
Yeah.
So that question comes up a lot, like, hey, do you guys use this exercise, or should I be doing this single leg schmig variation, or this banded shoulder flamingo thing? And really what you want to think about is like, okay, well, what is going to make me the most successful at whatever I'm doing? And more often than not, it always comes back to the basics. So if you're not doing a ton of those basics, probably want to rethink what you're doing. Now, it's not to say that accessory stuff is bad, but that should represent a very small fraction, like 1/3, as Mike already said.
And just like a bonus piece of information for the question asker and anyone who's listening, so there are some very big constraints on program design. One of them is the constraint of what we'd like to call effective variation. Every mesocycle or so, especially if you're a bodybuilder, you want to switch up some of the exercise that you're using because the exercises develop a certain resistance to adaptation. They develop some staleness, right? You can only do sumo squats for a while until they really don't grow much of anything anymore. So you've got to rotate exercises in and out of your program once every 4 to 6 weeks or so. That being as it may, we're now dealing with a situation where, okay, so we need exercise variance, but we're constrained again. We only want the effective variance, right? So if you're looking at ways to grow your chest, you've got flat presses, incline presses, dumbbell work, dips, weighted push-ups, and like, man, that's like about it, you know. Machine works okay, but it's not going to really be a big variant. Weird, like one-arm cable flies on a Bosu ball. There's all kinds of, you can get really funky, but if you get too funky, you've given up variation, or you've given up the overload component. Your variants are no longer overloading. So a really cool trick you can use, it's not really a trick, one weird trick, right? A really cool technique you can use to conserve your variation, but still get in high volume loads is this. Instead of a chest day, instead of having, for example, flat bench press, then incline dumbbell press, and then weighted dips, right? You've used up 3 exercises that you can't repeat until another mesocycle after that, right? Because they're going to get stale. So a really good idea instead of that is to do bench press heavy, down sets, bench press light, right? Same volume instead of doing those incline presses, and then doing weighted dips after that, right? And then so you've only used up 2 exercises, but you've gotten the same amount of total volume in. So a lot of times when James and I are designing programs, people are like, so what do you mean by squat and then squat? We mean first you squat with 200 kilos for reps, then you lower the weight to 180 or 160, and you keep going. And
what kind of clients are you working with?
Me. So you know, you can double up on exercises and use down sets to your advantage to both stick with those hardcore heavy basics and to make sure that you're not overusing variation, because you don't want a mesocycle in which you've used every fucking exercise you know, and then you sit down to write your next month's program and you're like, well, I don't have anything new. I'm already used to everything. This is a super common problem in bodybuilding. People have this paranoia about full development. You need to hit the muscle for maybe 2, maybe 3 angles, and you hit all the fibers anyway. You don't have to go around the typical bro chest workout. Incline, flat, decline, dips, incline flies, machine flies, pec deck, and then push-ups. Like, are you out of your mind? And a lot of them, if that bro happens to understand the MRV concept, then it's just going to be 2 sets of everything. That's a fuck ton of warming up purposefully, jostling for machines that somebody else might be using, and you pissed away all your variation. How about this? 5 sets of bench heavy, 5 sets of bench lighter. By then your pecs are going to be screaming. 3 sets of incline dumbbell press, you got the whole chest. I promise, same total volume, tons of disruption, and you didn't use any of your exercise variants, so the next month you've got something new to use. And that's really something that is, I see that mistake all the time because people get paranoid. I've got to hit it from every angle. Just a couple angles will do. You don't have to use every machine at the gym every time.
I feel like we've been ranting on this one for a little bit, but I got one more. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Very similar to what Mike was talking about when you run out of exercise variance. You know, for sports like bodybuilding, it's a little bit more straightforward. You get a little bit more freedom. When you work in other sports like rugby or soccer or like field sports, anything that you really have to develop power and speed, there's also something to be said about phase potentiation. So if you use up all of your tools in the toolkit in terms of exercise variation, then you lose the benefit of sequencing your training styles all the way up until your competitive phases, right? So one of the things that we like to do is make sure that your exercise selection is varied, as Mike already explained, but also that it represents what you're trying to achieve within that mesocycle so that you are stacking your benefits over time, right? So I spent some time doing certain exercises for hypertrophy. I made that muscle bigger. Then I move into my strength phase. I pick exercises that will allow me to express strength and get stronger.
Not dumbbell presses.
Well, yeah, that's a good example, right? So you pick something that allows you to express strength, right? Like a barbell bench press versus a dumbbell bench press. And then if you're working in like field sports or sports where there's a speed power component, you can transition into like your power training later on. Once you've made that muscle stronger, now you treat that muscle in a way that makes it express that same force at higher velocities, etc., right? So that's another reason why you don't want to have so many exercise variations within the same session, because you lose the benefit of variation, but you also lose the benefit of phase potentiation over time. So it's kind of like a big no-no.
Yeah, it's a great answer.
Awesome.
I think I often see like programs from people, so typically it tends to be kind of female figure competitors, and they'll include just a crazy number of variations of exercise, and their reasoning is to get more volume in, and you kind of think, well, just do more of the basics. You don't need to do the good girl, bad girl machine, the single leg Bosu squats, the curtsy squats, the wide stance, close stance, leg presses. Just do the stuff that works and do more of it and train harder.
For sure. Stick to the basics and fill up all your training with that.
Yep. Definitely. So if we move on, so if we go to switch to some nutrition questions now, I'll ask the first one that I've got here, which is actually a question from Michelle, and I was going to expand on this a bit as well, because Michelle asked, can I drink a quarter of a glass of wine in the evening while on my weight loss diet? Which, obviously, kind of macros and calories, I suppose in theory, yes, but I suppose I'd like to expand and ask about alcohol's impact on fat loss and potentially training and recovery as well, if you wouldn't mind touching on that.
Yeah, for sure. Can I start off? All right, great. So there's really, we just like to cut to the chase on this one. There's not a lot of room to beat around the bush, and it's not the answer that people generally like to hear. But consuming alcohol has a direct effect on, unfortunately, making you fatter and causing you to grow less muscle mass, or in the case of cutting, maintain less muscle mass. It also adversely affects your sleep cycles, which will inhibit your recovery adaptive processes, which will make your training crappier. And if your training's crappier, the magnitude of adaptation that you get from your training goes down. It's just this big, vicious cycle, right? It makes everything crappier. That being said, it operates on a dose response, meaning if you drink a little bit, if you have wine, like she said, every once in a while, is it a huge deal? Absolutely not a huge deal. Are you better off without it? For sure. Now, if you are somebody who drinks a whole case of Tecate every night, right, then you're going to start to see some pretty significant problems, right? That's going to interfere with a lot of different cellular processes leading towards muscle growth and adaptation. It's going to inhibit your ability to get good, restful sleep, and you're going to be drunk all day. You're probably going to lose your job and have to go to the unemployment services, right? So that's not a really good way to go about things. Now, some kind of practical things that we say for people, I like to drink. We're not saying that it's, you don't have to cut out alcohol altogether. If you're going to drink and you're on a cut phase, right, try to keep it limited. I usually say stick with hard liquor and diet mixers. Try not to get a lot of the sugary, carby stuff. Try not to go too crazy on the beer. And if you want, you can subtract a little bit of calories. If you know you're going to be drinking later on in the day, you can take some of your calories out from other sources, like some carbs or some fats, earlier in the day to accommodate extra calories. But, at that point, you really should be reconsidering what you're actually doing, right? So if you're taking calories away from how much you're eating so that you can drink, you should probably do some reevaluating at that point anyway.
Everything James said, just one really quick addition. Your level of drinking should reflect the seriousness and demand magnitude of your goals. Seriousness of goals. I have a really important weightlifting, powerlifting, bodybuilding, etc. competition coming up soon. Don't fucking drink. Right? If it's serious and you want to win, don't do it, right? Or drink much less. On the other hand, if you are, just trying to lose 5 kilos of fat and you've got 3 months to do it, then yeah, you can drink a couple drinks here and there. It's probably not a big deal. You'll probably be successful. So there's no reason to turn into a contest bodybuilder when you have goals that are pretty straightforward. So that's from the perspective of what you kind of can get away with. And the other one is a perspective of demand. If you are successfully losing weight and everything's going fine and you've been drinking, keep it up, enjoy. But if you are experiencing stalls in strength, stalls in progress, you're not losing weight, the wine's going to have to get reduced. And this can be a spectrum thing more than an either or. If you're preparing for a big contest, 18 weeks out, you can have a couple glasses of wine. You can even party some. 14 weeks out, it's time to maybe just have a couple glasses of wine. 8 weeks out, maybe some scotch or something like that with some diet mixers. 4 weeks out, probably not a good idea to drink. So it should be scaled to the goal and scaled to what you're willing to get away with. And if you're not super seriously involved in lifting, are a couple drinks a night going to ruin your career? No way. You're going to be great. You're going to have tons of fun. You're going to get to enjoy being relaxed at night and have all kinds of benefits. But if competition is very serious to you, the closer it gets and the tougher things get, the more you have to reconsider that alcohol as a problem. So there's no either or answer. But I'll tell you this real quick: if the going's good, drink up. If you start to struggle, you know where to cut.
Awesome answer, guys. I definitely agree in the same sense with the alcohol, there's a scale of how strict you need to be. It's the same with flexible dieting. Most of the time you can be really flexible, you can enjoy some booze. But when you have strict goals, you really want to perform at your best, or really you're getting down to lean levels. Flexible dieting kind of isn't so flexible, so alcohol at the same time, kind of you say bye to it. So yeah, I completely agree with that. I much prefer food in these last kind of weeks of contest prep. Who wants to drink booze over food? They're crazy.
Yeah, totally, right? Think of how much like whole grain bread you could have had instead of having those couple beers, right? Like,
wine is not filling.
No.
Oh yeah, really quick, another concern, and this is more from the coaching perspective. I don't want to say than the scientific, than the direct physiological. This is from the psychological. It is a very different thing to discuss intentions and consequences. You intend to have a glass of wine, and that's the only thing you're going to account for. It's very easy to account for. Problem is, you have a glass, and all of a sudden your willpower takes a predictable dip, and you end up eating a whole bunch of crap, and you say, oh, it's the wine. Well, really, yeah, it is kind of the wine because it's dipping your willpower and making you succumb to these cravings. So if you know you can just have a glass of wine and not to alter anything, James here, he drinks regularly, has beer usually a couple nights during his cutting phase, and it's a couple beers, but he doesn't do anything else.
He's selling me out.
It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. He'll have a couple beers, and then he'll calmly mix his casein pudding exactly like his macros say. He'll eat it, and then he'll go to sleep. And I'm like, man, after I have a couple beers, I'm driving to Taco Bell immediately. Just kidding. Don't drink and drive. I'm hitchhiking to Taco Bell,
Uber.
scaring random people, and goodbye diet. So for me, I don't barely drink ever anyway, but, when I drink, it's only on a mass or maintenance phase because I'm trying to blow out. I don't play around. But if you can constrict your drinking and still eat well, you're going to be able to drink through a majority of a cutting phase. But this is the kicker. Know who you are. If you tell yourself that you can't just have a couple drinks, you had better just have a couple drinks, and don't kid yourself that it all starts with half a glass of wine. Most children will probably end up born that way, is it all started with a half a glass of wine.
I'm just going to have 2 bites of Easy Mac.
I'm just going to, yeah, I'm just going to download a couple videos off this website, and that's it. What?
We have cable.
Yeah.
We're going too far again, aren't
Way
we?
too far.
Yeah, okay.
We're done answering the question.
Awesome. So I think the next question is mine, and this is an interesting one to me because I don't know anything. I have no way I could answer it. With all the talk of collagen protein, apparently there's been a lot of talk about it. I'd like to know what you guys think would be better, whey or collagen for muscle growth and recovery.
RP Mel is also here, and she just rolled her eyes in the corner a little bit. She gave a little grunt.
Well, can I answer this one?
Totally.
You ask yourself a really quick question. What's stronger, the collagen in bones and tendons and ligaments that holds our very lives together, or a glass of milk? And I think the answer is pretty clear. But if you really want the best protein, you have to go to the source of strength, bull testicles. Preferably eaten unprocessed, raw. Preferably, in a sustainable environment where a genetically engineered bull actually regrows testicles for you, farm to table.
I prefer non-GMO bull.
I don't like GMO bull. You're right. So it's farmed bulls, 900 or so of them on a farm, and they just, once their testicles are gone, you switch to a regular dairy farm, cattle farm. Yeah. Do you guys want a serious answer to that question?
That works, but got an alternative as well.
The literature on the advantages of whey protein numbers into the several hundreds, possibly thousands of studies. The literature on collagen protein numbers much lower than that. I'm not even sure there's enough to conduct a literature review properly. And from all the, if we were gambling people, as far as amino acid profiles are concerned, digestion rates are concerned, completeness scores are concerned, whey protein is such a clear and easy correct choice that it's unclear why you would mess around with collagen. We just don't know enough yet, but what we do know is not particularly exciting. There's really no reason to think in any large sense that's replicable that collagen has some kind of weird advantages over whey protein. It's I would say that currently, until better evidence shows up, I would categorize it as just another fad. They go through this every now and again where some weird protein is made. They have beef protein, right? Carnivore nutrition made like beef protein and like made of actual meat. And so people are like, what do you think about beef? I don't think about beef protein much at all. And when I eat it, I like to have it through actual meat instead of a powder. That's weird. I don't have pasta protein to have pasta, but now I just get everything on a spaceship and eat. It's one of those situations where they have like talk about pea protein, hydrolyzed casein. When I see the evidence of hundreds of studies pointing in the positive direction, I'll get really excited. Until then, I'm recommending whey protein because there's two things we can say. Is collagen potentially a good source of protein? Sure, potentially yes, but whey's for sure a good source of proteins. I'm not really sure, and this is not a problem in the fitness industry. It's just part of our landscape. Some people just seem to think that their mentality of thinking is, what little hack, what little trick can I get on first before everyone? What little advantage? What's everyone doing that they think is right, but I've got just a little bit better? If you think collagen is going to make or break you versus whey protein, even if it is better, you're already off to the wrong way of thinking. Get the basics down, that's what makes you grow. There's not a single IFBB pro bodybuilder that got to be that way because he used collagen instead of whey or whey instead of collagen. So already, it's a fine question to ask. But if you put too much stock in, ooh, what about this? Ooh, what about that? Ooh, what about just stick to the basics? And then on top of that, the next question you have to answer for collagen is not just, is it good or is it potentially good? Those answers may very well be yes. You have to battle against this leviathan of whey protein that has so much positive literature and so little negative literature into it. It's mind-boggling. It's kind of like this, you see a guy at your gym or something like that is talking about entering a powerlifting competition, and at your gym he's really big and jacked, and he says, I'm going to go to nationals and try to break a world record. You show up to nationals, you will quickly realize you're dealing with titans. Those people are not human. You're super strong. They forgot what that even felt like years ago because they bent all the barbells at their normal gym and got kicked out and now only hang out with other lifters. So it's a very different thing to say collagen might be good, and it may very well be. It may be that strong guy at your gym. But Whey doesn't even train at your gym. He trains at the National Training Center and is doped to the gills, and he doesn't have any more friends left over, and he just knows training. And he cries himself to sleep at night, but he says it's worth it.
Not intervention.
He's on intervention. He's a training addict.
And so science is a fluid thing, right? And so what we like to say is, sometimes these things change, right? 20 years from now, we might eat those words, and we might be like, you know what?
And eat collagen.
And eat collagen after. We say, we missed the mark on that one, right? But all we can say is what we can see right now. And what we say right now is like, it could be good. We just can't really say with any certainty. And this is something that comes up not just for supplements and nutrition, but for recovery methods, for training methods. People pose these kind of questions all the time, and we say, you know what? We know what works really well. This might have some value at our current time. We just can't say with any certainty, and that's where we're at right now. And so maybe in 10 years we'll have more to say about it, but for now, I think, like what Mike said, whey protein is probably the best way to stick, the best baseline to stick with.
I guess it comes down to people trying to just reinvent the wheel and almost not wanting to listen to the basics because everyone kind of knows them and they want that latest secret and latest trick, which unfortunately, I suppose, is what drives our industry, but at the same time, it's what frustrates us.
Yeah, for sure. There's a reason why they're fads, right? Because they come and go and they don't really account for much. And this is just something that we see a lot. And we're not trying to point fingers at any one thing or another, but a lot of things come and go. And that's usually because they don't have as much validity as people put as the stock into, right? So it's normal. It's just a normal part of the process.
Yeah, just stick to the basics. No, that's awesome. I think we're pretty much on time there. So got through a ton of stuff. Response we had to the questions were brilliant, to be honest, so detailed. And I think hopefully what the guys got from that, apart from just a load of sort of knowledge and everything, was the fact that it's actually, you guys have got such a wealth of information and responses just came thick and fast. And so I think it's going to be quite a challenge to outwit you with any questions at all. So I think we might have to actually, when you're in the UK, have a test. If anyone can stump you with a question, then I think we should have to buy them a drink.
We welcome it. Please bring your questions. We love talking shop. And if you get our wheels turning, you did a great job. We welcome it.
Okay, I have two things to say. One is if you beat us in debate about sports science and you stump us, we will buy you a drink and I'll poison it. So we'll say, enjoy, you did such a great job, you'll end up dead. Okay? And second of, am I allowed to call people out in the UK over this that I'm going to actually get to meet in person?
Yeah.
Okay. Chin Lee Dan, I'm coming for you. Your time is at an end. You better be watching this too. He knows who he is. Chin Lee Dan, that's all I have to say. Pray. See you in London.
No, that's an offer I don't think anyone can refuse. Cool. So I think we'll wrap up there. I'll give some brief details again. We'll the seminar dates and everything in a second. But anything either of you two guys, Mike or James, want to add before we finish?
No, we're just super excited to be out there, man, and meet everyone. And I've never been to the UK at all, so we're super excited to see and meet all you guys, and it's gonna be a great time.
Yeah, we really are friendly in real life. We make a lot of jokes. Bring tons of questions and bring a healthy dose of sarcasm and anti-venom when we poison you.
Yes.
Brilliant. We'll definitely go for fish and chips. We'll go for pints, and might take you to meet the Queen as well, because apparently that's what.
Yeah. I heard the traffic gets really bad when she's around.
Yeah, it's not the best. Steve, anything to add before we finish?
No, I thought I'd just say thank you very much for doing the Q&A. It's just a tiny taste of what people can kind of get when they come to London or Brighton. And you can see that not only is it entertaining, informative, but they actually get to the grounding, kind of giving the application at the end. You know what to take away, what actions you should take. And I can only imagine how much kind of value you'll take away from coming to the seminars. And I hope you got a lot of value from this question and answer. I know I did. So I'll be rewatching and taking notes, and I hope everyone else will be as well.
Yeah, definitely. If you're even on the fence about it, just get yourself along. You know, if you're a fit pro, if you're just interested in fitness, if you're a powerlifter, bodybuilder, it's going to be a great day in Brighton on May the 18th and a great weekend in London on the 21st and 22nd. So we'll throw some links up to the Facebook pages and the event pages themselves. You know, you can't put a price on your education if you're in the industry anyway, and this is going to be far better than doing another generic course or buying a few bits online. So get along to it. Networking, we'll get some drinks, get some food, and have a great time and learn a lot. So yeah, cheers everyone for being on.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Thanks, guys, and yeah, we'll see everyone soon.
Yeah, cheers everyone. I'll close it there. Thank you.